Hello friends, this is Linda here, and I am most delighted to introduce to you our concert for tonight, Mozart Hour Online. And in this brief talk with you, I am very delighted to share with you a little bit about each of the pieces that we'll be playing. And also, very importantly, it's very humbling and my privilege to dedicate this recital to the memory of my late father, William Scott Gilbert. So you'll hear a little bit more about the memories that I'd like to share of my dear father just a little bit further on. First, I'd like to introduce the works that you'll be hearing tonight. So this is the two sonatas by Mozart. He composed over 30 of these works. These ones we've selected are in C major and G major respectively. And this first piece in C major is in 3 parts, so you'll be hearing all of them tonight. And the work is very lively and boundless in its energy and rhythmic impetus. So it's a wonderfully joyful piece, and as you'll hear, the middle section is particularly noteworthy for its lyricism and inwards looking spiritual quality. And the third movement is very lively again and bouncing around with the rondo theme, and then lots of, which happens many times over in the piece, and then intertwined by several different episodes, musical episodes that you can enjoy. So over to the second work now, so the G major sonata, and this one is interesting piece because it does look forward to the music of a master that Mozart greatly admired in his time, and that is none other than Ludwig van Beethoven. And Beethoven actually, of course, in his early works reflected the style of Mozart. It's very interesting to compare this aspect of the two composers. So this is structurally a very interesting work. We begin with the opening, which is very slow and very expansive, with a lot of chords in the piano, so spreading the chords over the keyboard and really creating this grand effect and using the harmonies of the piano to the fullest, which is a wonderful, wonderful idea by Mozart. And so the violin takes up the opening for after the piano introduction and follows on with a glorious melodic line. So the interesting thing too is that Mozart really explored and used to the fullest that he could the effect with the violin's ability to hold the melodic line and hold the sound with the bow on the string. So this creates a very stunning effect of just a floating melody that doesn't stop. And yeah, it's really very special. You'll enjoy that in the concert, so in just a moment. And so we actually follow this first movement with the second movement that Mozart wrote alongside, and this is a very interesting theme and variations, and it again reflects Beethoven's style very much in a particular part where there's a pizzicato or plucked string variation for the violin, while the piano has these dramatic chords across the keyboard. So it's a stunning effect, and it's one of my favorites parts of the piece. And I should mention that in the first movement, just going back to the first movement of the work, it's very striking, the tonality change from the G major opening straight into the G minor. So this is definitely looking at the style of Beethoven and his dramatic kind of style. So yeah, it's definitely a work that you will enjoy, and we are very happy and privileged to bring it to you this evening. Now, so this concert, as mentioned, is dedicated to the memory of my late father, William Scott Gilbert. Now, my father was born in Sydney, so in 1929, on the 27th of February. And so he lived a very long life and up to the age of 87. So he sadly passed away on September 8, 2016. But his life was full of very interesting things and interesting travels as well. And he worked as an analytical chemist in the Department of Agriculture for a long, long time. Before that, he completed his higher education in the University of Sydney. And when he was starting to work in the laboratory, he developed friendships with colleagues who also appreciated, just like him, classical music and fine musicians. So it wasn't long before he was exploring and getting a fine record collection and really appreciating the wonderful gift that classical music is for even people that don't play. And so he wasn't actually a musician, but he was such a massive fan of violin and classical music in general. And particularly the piano music and violin music, he was a massive fan of that. So I have to say that it's a really great privilege to bring the music of Mozart to this very special tribute to my father. This is, of course, representing one of my father's greatest loves of classical music. So Mozart, of course, is universally regarded as really one of the finest composers that ever lived, and one of the best loved. And it's not hard to see why, of course, for the melodic beauty and just the energy and the joyfulness that he brought to music, to his music. And so, it's particularly noteworthy is the fact that my father never played violin, but he was really very interested in the structure and compositions that Mozart wrote for violin and orchestra. So those 5 violin concertos, and particularly number 3. You won't be hearing that one in the concert tonight, but that's just an interesting fact that my dad really enjoyed that piece in particular. But we have, of course, 2 of these sonatas, and my father often enjoyed listening to the great recordings that I, of course, collected when I was just a small child from the age of 10 or 11 or 12. So that's was really a great memory that I had of his appreciation for music of Mozart. Just going back to his musical interests, so he and a little bit about his life. So he had 2 sisters, and both of them unfortunately no longer with us. But they also appreciated music like him. But my father really developed such a lifelong interest in classical music, and that led him to eventually, when he got married and had a family, and so I was child number 5, he definitely encouraged that and passed on that love for classical music and violin. He passed that on to each of his children, and definitely I was no exception. So even though I was the youngest of all the 5 children that my mum and dad had, so I particularly really was deeply influenced by my dad's love of fine classical music. And of course, the time came when I was 6 years old, and I was going to decide I was going to take violin lessons. So my dad really supported that desire that I had, even just as a young child as I was. He was absolutely right behind everything that I wanted to do with the violin from the very beginning. So I'm ever grateful to that aspect of my dad's love for classical music and music education. He really saw the value of good musical education for each of his children. So he really wanted to provide the best that he could. And he often would tell me that we want always the best possible for you in the field of music education. So for me, that will always stay with me. And I feel very humbled and privileged always that he was always there to inspire me to reach new heights and to practice hard and to develop into the musician that I am today. And I'm very grateful to him for all of that inspiration and the love that he passed on for wonderful music. So he was very much someone that I looked up to as a small child, of course, and really respected. So, of course, there was a big difference between the age of my father and the age of my mother. So the 18 years between them. But it's very gratifying to know that both of them wanted to nurture the love of for fine music into their children and inspire them to do their best. And certainly I benefited from all of that love and nurturing for the musical education that I was able to have. And of course, right up until the time where I went to study overseas. And so it was really a great, I think, a great thrill for my father to see that, realize that I was able to go and study overseas. And I think he felt quite proud of my desires and my pursuits and different achievements as the years went on when I pursued overseas study. So I will always be grateful to not only my father but also my mother for all those inspirations along the way to do my very best in my studies. Of course, those studies have now finished since 5 years ago, but and unfortunately my father did not live to see the graduation in Moscow Conservatory, but nevertheless he really admired the high standard of musical education in that place and realized that that's where I need to be for receiving the best possible musical training. And I'm very grateful to both my parents for realizing that this was definitely an important part of my career as a young musician. Just a little bit about the reason why my dad wanted to, and my mum as well, but my dad really enjoyed, besides music, he had a great love of gardening. So he originally, of course, lived in Sydney all his life, and he travelled Australia quite widely to do with his work and different reasons. But when he married and had kids, with the fact was that he wanted to have a little bit more space in the garden. So he decided to have a look, and my mum decided to have a look up in the Manning region, so the mid-north coast of New South Wales. So they were looking at moving up from Sydney, and it really was something that they wanted to provide for the children, for us children to experience a greater love for the natural world as well. And I'm grateful for that. Of course, it wasn't long before my musical pursuits took me down back to the city again, but so to Newcastle, to Sydney. But it's, of course, a really important thing, I think, that he had a great love of the natural world, and he appreciated that, and he saw that as important for his children to grow up with. He and my mum and most of the children, we moved up to Taree in 1994 from Sydney, and a lot of my childhood was spent in the town of Taree. So I grew up there, and spent a long time there until the age of 21, when I finally was able to move overseas to pursue the tertiary degree studies. So again, I think it's really wonderful that both my parents didn't stop all my goals and wishes and dreams for pursuing music as a professional career. I mean, there's a lot of different opinions in Australia, and with families. I mean, people are in different situations, but regardless of that, my parents always were trying to make a way for it to be possible for me to continue studying, and for me that is something that I'll always be grateful for. So that I wouldn't have my dreams stopped, and that I could actually have them realized. The just getting back to the connection of Mozart and my father. So, of course, we're talking to entirely different eras and generations here, but I just want to say how much my father appreciated the works of Mozart, and he particularly enjoyed listening to the symphonies and piano concertos, the violin concertos also, particularly the third one. The music that you'll hear tonight is, as I said, the G major sonata in particular looks to Beethoven. So my dad had a great love of Beethoven as well as Mozart, and those two composers were great admirers of each other, but they never got together for any of those promised lessons that Beethoven was hoping to receive from Mozart. Or those planned ones anyway, don't know. But yeah, it's very touching that my dad really appreciated deeply the compositional styles of both these composers. So, and he also taught me a lot in terms of music history in my childhood days. So aside from looking at books and taking in all the information from books, I'm really grateful to my dad for that influence and that inspiration that he gave to me, and that knowledge just through his own love of music. And the historical side of composers really interested and fascinated my dad. So from that, I learned a lot of things, even when I was a small child, growing up at the age of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, particularly those years were very, very important. I'm always grateful that my father tried his best to attend all the local competitions and concert performances that I would give in the years to come. My father really appreciated, of course, his friends and family in the Manning Valley. But I guess the love of this fine music really led him to continue to be the wonderful, inspirational man that he was. He was a deeply spiritual man, my dad as well, so he had a deep conviction and faith in God, and so that remained with him until he died. Of course, for him that was extremely important, that faith, and it was my privilege to also inherit the same belief and the hope that we have, of course, of seeing him again one day. So it's a wonderful privilege that I had growing up with such an inspirational father. And unfortunately, of course, when it actually happened that he started getting ill in his later years, and I was a long time overseas, and so I didn't actually get to see him that often. But when I would come back and play concerts, he'd often be there. In fact, pretty much every time he would be there at the concerts. And I remember the last concert that I gave in August of 2016. That was really special. He was sitting in the front row, and that memory will stay with me. It made me feel a bit extra nervous, but yeah, it was something that was a very special occasion. And I'm really grateful that my father was such a strong supporter of my concert activities that he could be. And also, just one thing that really stuck out for me, his attention to meticulousness in his his and his attitude towards presentation in a concert occasion or any competitions or anything. Like, if he would go along to watch, he would never just come straight from the garden and go to the concert. He would never do that. He would always dress himself up very well, and it was something that I noticed actually when I was growing up, that he would always make sure he was absolutely in his very best clothes. And yeah, he just really made a point of that, and so that taught me a lot of things about my own artistic presentation, I guess, when I'm presenting music for other people. And yeah, so that's one thing that really influenced me and has stayed with me to this day. So that's one thing I wanted to mention alongside everything else. But of course, Dad lived all those years in the Manning area on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. So, of course, he made a lot of friends, both in the church and just around from the community. So he was very well loved and respected by a lot of dear friends and of our family. And they recognized in him, all these interesting and very lovely qualities as a person. So, I remember how my school friends in the class of my school when I was growing up and in primary school, they were always so respectful when they would meet my father. It was something of a they just had this deep respect every time they would meet him and greet him as well. And I think that says something about my dad he didn't strut himself around, but I think it says something like people really respected him for who he was and what he stood for as a Christian man and a very loving father. So I'm really delighted that we have this chance to bring music for you as a tribute to my father. So that's pretty much wraps up the little talk before our concert. But I just wanted to again mention that my father was such an important part of who I am as a musician today. He really contributed so much to my musical life, and he lived such a fruitful life of 87 years. And it's just something that I'll always keep in my heart. So thanks for listening, everyone, and we look forward to performing for you our concert of Mozart Hour Online, Radiant Reflections, a tribute to my late father, William Scott Gilbert. Thank you very much.